Hey, I want to thank you for watching my video today. Today, I want to continue our series on He Promises. So far, we've talked about two of the promises that Jesus gives us in the New Testament. Today, I want to talk about the third, and that is, you are not alone in your struggles. There's an interesting thing that happens in Mark chapter 4, and I encourage you to take an opportunity to read Mark chapter 4. But Jesus is preaching to a crowd in a boat. And then after he preaches, after he shares a few parables, he tells his disciples to get in the boat and to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, one of the things that you don't do at night on the Sea of Galilee is go across the Sea of Galilee, because winds would come in and whip up waves of 6 to 12 feet high. And in the boats that they traveled in back in those days, that would have been like a hurricane to boats today. And so Jesus is sending them into the storm, and he's with them. Now, some of you may say, man, I don't get it. Why would Jesus send his disciples into a storm? Why would Jesus send them into that kind of difficulty? But it's really not any different than it is as a coach. As I coach players in multiple sports, one of the things that I have to do is to put them in difficult situations in practice, because only through dealing with and going through those difficult situations in practice are they prepared for the game. And Jesus is preparing his disciples for what's going to happen after he leaves. And he does the same thing within our lives today. He places us in storms. Now, that's going to be hard for some of you to understand, hard for some of you to hear, because we like to think that when we become a believer in Jesus Christ, that everything is rosy, that life is a box of chocolates and every day is a good day because it's a good piece of chocolate. But that's not what Jesus was saying. And that is not what Jesus promised to us. He promised us troubles. He promised us hardships. He promised us difficulties, because he took on our sin and faced difficulties and hardships. And for us to be like Christ, we must also be willing to go through the difficult times. We must be willing to train our bodies, to train our minds, to train our hearts for the difficulties that are going to come in life. And so we're going to face many storms. And so he sends his disciples into the storm. And it says that as they were going across the Sea of Galilee, a storm came in, and the boat started to get swamped. It was starting to fill with water. And the disciples were really concerned they were never going to make it to the other side. The boat was about to go under. And so in fear, they ran to the stern of the boat, and really didn't have to run. Their boats weren't that big. But they went to the stern of the boat, and they woke up Jesus, and they said to him, "Don't you care what happens to us?" And they say a response that many of us have in our lives as we face difficulties in our lives. We accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. We make him Lord of our lives. And then we face storms. And for those of us who don't have strong foundations, we walk away from the faith. For some of us who have stronger foundations, but not growing, we tend to just stalemate at that point. But Jesus had them in a storm for a reason, and he has us in storms for a reason. And we face difficulties in our lives for reasons. And we probably, just like the disciples, when we're facing difficulties in our marriages, when we're facing difficulties in our jobs, when we're facing difficulties in relationships, when we're facing all kind of difficulties in our lives, when we're facing difficulties because of temptation, we get to a point where we probably say, "Lord, don't you care? I said that I love you. Take care of me." But see, it's when we face the storms that we grow in our faith. It's when we face the storms that we come into a greater presence of Jesus in our lives. The reality is, when things are going good, we don't tend to think we need Jesus. And it becomes a lot about me. It becomes about my wants, my desires, my thing. And then when we face the hardships and the difficulties in our lives, that's when we turn to Jesus. That's when we say, "Don't you care?" It was the pattern of the Israelites in the Old Testament that they only turned to God when times were difficult. And then they would be good for a while. And then when things got good, they would go back into their patterns of sin. We face difficulties in our life to refine us, to strengthen us, to empower us. That's the first thing we need to understand. And the second thing is this: we are not alone. Jesus isn't just in a boat. Jesus is in our heart. David said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." He knew that God was with him. And David faced more difficulties than many people in this world ever will. But he never gave up on God. And he always turned to God in the difficult times. But yet, even he sometimes struggled with being faithful in the good times. And so we need, I know it sounds weird, but we need difficulties. We need storms because it's in the storms that we secure our foundation, when we hunker down in Jesus. Some of you are facing storms today. Maybe it's a sickness, maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's a work thing. Maybe you lost your job and you're wondering where God is. I can guarantee you, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, he is right there with you. All you have to do is lean on him in your times of difficulty and know that the same Jesus who calmed the storm 2,000 years ago and amazed his disciples can bring you calm in your life even while the storm is going on, because he is all powerful. It doesn't mean he's going to take the storm away, but it does mean that he's going to be holding us as we go through it. That's a great promise. That's one each and every one of us should be excited about in our lives. As I close today, I want to encourage you to like and subscribe and comment on these videos. Again, we need to continue to like and subscribe and to comment on these videos because, again, I'm not getting paid for this. I just want these videos to reach more and more people for Jesus Christ. And I encourage you to share it with your friends and your loved ones. And if you're in the Sandwich area this Sunday, come and join us as we continue to talk about the promises of Jesus and the New Testament.